USS Washington and South Dakota sliced through the inky darkness of the Solomon Sea, her crew on edge as they patrolled the perilous waters off Guadalcanal. The night of November 14th, 1942, was thick with tension after the first naval battle of Guadalcanal carnage. Aboard the bridge, Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Ching stood like a coiled spring, hunting for a Japanese force he knew was vastly superior in numbers and firepower. If they spotted his task force first, they could crush them. In the ship's Combat Information Center, radar operators hunched over their screens, their faces bathed in an eerie green glow. Washington's advanced radar system was a closely guarded secret, and the thing Lee was placing all his hope in. He was a fierce proponent of radar technology, believed it could revolutionize naval warfare, and wasn't afraid to stake everything on it. The radar gave them an unprecedented advantage, allowing them to detect enemy ships long before visual contact. Lee was convinced that wielding this power could turn the tide against any Japanese force. Suddenly, a radar operator's voice cracked over the intercom. Quote, "Targets north-northwest, making 21 knots in 2 columns at a range of 18,000 yards. Lee took a drag from his cigarette, glanced over his shoulder at Captain Glenn Davis and casually remarked, quote, "Well, stand by, Glenn, here they come." The message reached the gunners, Washington's main battery of 16-inch guns. In the deep below deck, men jumped to their feet, initiating the laborious process of loading the massive weapons. The enemy was bearing down, blind to the hell the 2 American battleships were about to unleash. The trap had to be perfectly sprung. There would not be a second chance. The Battle of Guadalcanal was a pivotal campaign in the Pacific theater of World War II. It marked the first major offensive by Allied forces against the Empire of Japan and was centered on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. The stakes were incredibly high for both the Americans and the Japanese, as control of Guadalcanal and its surrounding waters would significantly influence the overall momentum of the war in the Pacific. For the Americans, Guadalcanal was strategically critical due to its location. The island's airfield, Henderson Field, provided a base for aircraft to protect supply routes between the United States and Australia. If the Japanese maintained control, they could threaten these crucial supply lines and use the island as a launching point for further expansion in the Pacific. Thus, securing Guadalcanal was essential for the Americans to maintain their strategic initiative and build a foundation for future offensives. On the other hand, the Japanese viewed Guadalcanal as a key to defending their conquests in the South Pacific. The island was part of their strategy to create a defensive perimeter, preventing the Allies from launching attacks closer to Japan's home islands and resource-rich Southeast Asian territories. Losing Guadalcanal would not only halt their southward advance, but also put their holdings in the Solomon Islands and beyond at significant risk. The First Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, fought from November 13 to 15, 1942, was a crucial confrontation in this campaign. The battle began when American and Japanese naval forces clashed in the waters around Guadalcanal. On the night of November 13th, a Japanese force led by Rear Admiral Hiroaki Abe attempted to bombard Henderson Field and deliver reinforcements to their troops on the island. However, they were intercepted by a hastily assembled American task force under Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan. The ensuing battle was brutal. Both sides were locked in close-quarters combat on a pitch-black night, with ships exchanging devastating gunfire and torpedoes. It was arguably the most unorganized and chaotic naval battle of World War II. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, the smaller American force bravely resisted a superior Japanese force. Their unwavering determination and courage were instrumental in repelling the Japanese attack. USS Atlanta, USS Juno, and several destroyers were lost, along with Rear Admiral Callahan and Rear Admiral Norman Scott, who was also aboard the USS Atlanta. However, the Americans managed to inflict significant damage on the Japanese fleet, forcing them to retreat and prevent Henderson Field's bombardment. From Henderson Field, aircraft launched an attack on the retreating Japanese forces, later sinking the incapacitated battleship Hiei on the 13th, thereby cementing America's strategic victory. This triumph ranked among the most significant for the United States in the Pacific theater of the war. However, the battle was far from over. Thanks to the efforts of US intelligence and the successful decryption of Japanese naval codes, Admiral William Halsey was well informed that the enemy was not finished with their attempts to strike Henderson Field. Another Japanese fleet was approaching, but America was prepared to meet them head-on this time. On the night of November 14th to 15, 1942, the battle for Guadalcanal raged on. A relentless Japanese fleet, mirroring the one from the night before, charged towards Henderson Field. Their force was a juggernaut. The battleship Kirishima, flanked by 4 cruisers and 9 destroyers, all primed to pulverize Henderson and pave the way for reinforcements landing in the dead of night. Admiral William "Bull" Halsey surveyed his dwindling defenses with a sinking heart. Most of his cruisers were either deep in battle or badly mauled. His destroyer fleet was being picked off ship by ship. All he had left for a surface clash were 2 warships patrolling as guardians for the battered carrier Enterprise. Battleships, once the pride of naval might, had been sidelined since Pearl Harbor. Once the queens of the sea, they had been overshadowed by aircraft carriers and submarines. By 1942, battleships were relegated to protective roles, their anti-aircraft guns shielding carriers from enemy planes. But now, in November 1942, with his cruisers and destroyers decimated and only 1 crippled carrier at his command, Halsey had no choice but to unleash his remaining battleships. Both relatively new and bristling with firepower, Washington and South Dakota received their orders. They veered north, cutting through the open waters off Noumea, heading straight for the deadly confines of Iron Bottom Sound, ready for a fight to the finish. Rear Admiral Willis Augustus Ching Lee would be the protagonist of this new encounter. An experienced naval commander and World War I veteran, Lee fiercely advocated for the introduction of radar technology into the US Navy. By the early 1940s, he had become an expert on radar, often knowing more about the technology than the operators themselves. His foresight was critical in modernizing naval combat tactics, enabling US forces to detect and engage enemies effectively in low-visibility conditions. Lee commanded destroyers and cruisers and served as a gunnery expert, earning a reputation for his tactical acumen and innovative thinking. His leadership was further recognized when he was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1942. As he sailed to meet this much superior force, Lee trusted that the US battleships' radars would give them the advantage they needed to come out on top of the Japanese fleet. At the time of the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, USS Washington and USS South Dakota were equipped with advanced SG radar systems, which provided a significant technological edge. The SG radar was a surface search radar capable of detecting ships and aircraft at considerable distances. Even at night, or in poor visibility conditions, this radar technology allowed the US battleships to track and engage enemy vessels with unprecedented accuracy and from beyond visual range. The Japanese Navy, in contrast, did not have comparable radar technology during this period. While Japan had developed some rudimentary radar systems, they were not widely deployed or as advanced as the US models. This lack of radar capability left the Japanese fleet at a significant disadvantage, relying primarily on visual detection and traditional optical rangefinders during engagements. The US had been developing radar technology since the late 1930s, with significant advancements made during the early years of World War II. The deployment of radar on ships like the Washington and South Dakota was a carefully kept secret to maintain a tactical advantage. Lee was now relying on radar technology as his trump card against the Japanese, but he had to use it carefully or risk exposing America's advantage. As the 2 fleets converged in the darkness, the fate of Guadalcanal hung in the balance. As the clock struck 10:30 p.m. on that fateful November night, the SG radar aboard Washington crackled to life, painting a grim picture of impending doom. 2 columns of enemy ships, like spectral fingers reaching out from the darkness, bore down on them at 21 knots. The range is a mere 18,000 yards, and it is closing fast. On the bridge, Admiral Willis Lee was standing with the ember of his cigarette illuminating his weathered face. He locked eyes with Captain Glenn Davis, his voice a low growl that belied the storm brewing in his gut. Quote, "Well, stand by, Glenn, here they come." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of impending battle. Amidst the ship's narrow passageways below decks, chaos erupted in a thunderous roar. The order to load the main battery echoed throughout, galvanizing the crew into swift action. In a blur of disciplined movement, they swarmed the massive 16-inch guns. Heavy 700-pound shells were slammed home with earth-shattering force, accompanied by the flight of 100-pound powder bags through the air. Remarkably, a task that ordinarily required 30 seconds was accomplished in a blistering 15, a testament to the crew's extraordinary efficiency and razor-sharp precision. The minutes ticked by like hours, tension coiling tighter with each passing second. At 11:13 p.m., fate's hand finally played its card. Lee's command cut through the air like a knife. Quote, "Open fire when ready." In an instant, hell itself was unleashed. 9 armor-piercing shells, each over a ton of destruction, erupted from Washington's guns, their sonic booms shattering the night. The Japanese cruiser Sendai, caught unawares, found herself in the eye of a steel hurricane. Geysers of water, tall as skyscrapers, erupted around the enemy ships, turning the sea into a boiling cauldron. Unaware of the presence of American battleships, the Japanese panicked as 900-foot geysers of water erupted around their ships, sent up by the thundering guns of South Dakota. South Dakota's radio snoopers intercepted horrified Japanese voices as the heavy cruiser Sendai and her escorts turned tail and fled, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the American capital ships. This part of the plan had been a massive success. The Japanese had been cut off guard and blind, and their largest ships had fled in a disorganized rout. But not all were good news. With their numerical advantage, the Japanese destroyers were ready to clash against their American counterparts. Aboard the battleship Washington, Admiral Lee watched with great concern as his destroyers engaged the Japanese destroyers, only to be summarily pounded. Within minutes, all 4 of Washington's escorts were out of the fight, leaving the 2 battleships, Washington and South Dakota, alone to face the onslaught of the Japanese. Lee's heart sank as Washington and South Dakota sailed through the debris field left by his destroyers. Amidst the chaos, they heard one of the sailors bobbing in the water, his voice barely audible above the roar of the guns, shouting, quote, "Get after 'em, Washington." The massive battleship steamed past at a speed of 26 knots, its guns blazing. Lee was tried to contact Captain Gatch aboard South Dakota, but there was only silence. Electrical failures plunged the new battleship into complete darkness, leaving it powerless and steaming onward blindly. The power was restored, only to fail again. Despite her electrical woes, South Dakota fought valiantly, returning fire with her main battery and hitting both Japanese cruisers that were setting her aflame. However, she had suffered over 26 hits, including a devastating 14-inch battleship shell. With her upper works ablaze, South Dakota was forced to retire from the fight. Now Washington and Admiral Willis Lee were alone, facing the wrath of the Japanese fleet. Lee's eyes narrowed as the radar screen in the USS Washington's Combat Information Center tracked a colossal target on her starboard beam. The atmosphere was thick with tension, palpable and electrifying. Could it be South Dakota, their sister ship, still blacked out and vulnerable? Lee's voice cut through the silence. Quote, "Check fire." Better to pause and verify than unleash friendly fire in the heat of battle. The order reverberated through the ship, temporarily restraining the trigger fingers itching to unleash destruction. As Kirishima's searchlight pierced the darkness like a ghostly apparition, illuminating South Dakota's silhouette, all uncertainty dissipated. The enemy had revealed itself, and the moment of truth had arrived. At a distance of 8,400 yards, a mere spitting distance for Washington's massive 16-inch cannons, Lee's command rang out, quote, "Fire!" The ship shuddered as her main battery roared into life, unleashing a thunderous barrage of shells toward Kirishima. Though narrowly missing its intended target, the first salvo served as a warning shot, bracketing the Japanese battleship in a steel embrace. Barely 30 seconds elapsed before Washington's guns bellowed again, delivering a devastating blow. A direct hit obliterated Kirishima's third-level bridge, turning it into a maelstrom of shrapnel and flame, vaporizing all personnel within. The third salvo from Washington proved to be cataclysmic. 5 shells slammed into Kirishima's amidships, their armor-piercing fury penetrating deep into her vitals. Bulkheads crumpled like paper, deck plates shredded, and gaping holes stretching 30 feet wide opened up to the night sky. Below the waterline, another shell tore through, unleashing a torrent that flooded the ship from starboard to port. Mortally wounded yet defiant, Kirishima unleashed her own salvo. Her 14-inch shells screamed past Washington's superstructure, so close that Lee felt the displaced air on his face. The range between the two ships closed to knife-fighting distance, and Washington's 5-inch batteries joined the fray, unleashing a relentless storm of steel upon Kirishima's superstructure, each impact tearing the metal apart like a butcher's blow. Amidst the nightmarish scene, Lee's voice rang out again, quote, "If you can see anything to shoot at, go ahead." It was permission to unleash Armageddon. At 7,850 yards, Washington's main guns spoke again, delivering 2 shells that seemed guided by an avenging entity, striking Kirishima's forward 14-inch turret simultaneously. The imposing weapon was obliterated in an instant. The coup de grace came swiftly. A 16-inch shell found Kirishima's rudder, detonating with savage force. The explosion jammed the rudder hard over, causing the battleship to spiral helplessly like a wounded beast. 20 direct hits from Washington's 16-inch guns and countless impacts from her 5-inch batteries had sealed Kirishima's fate. She staggered through the inky blackness, listing heavily, fires raging unchecked. With agonizing slowness, she rolled over, her stern lifting skyward before plunging into the abyss, her shattered hulk disappearing beneath the waves. The Japanese task force, stripped of its centerpiece, made one last defiant gesture, launching a salvo of torpedoes in a futile cry of rage against the inevitable. Then they fled into the night, their tails between their legs. Lee saw no need to pursue. Washington had accomplished her mission, crushing the enemy's spirit as thoroughly as she had crushed their ships. He ordered a zigzag course, retiring from the field of battle, leaving behind a sea stained with oil, wreckage, and the crushed honor of the Imperial Navy. The fierce engagement between USS Washington and USS South Dakota against a superior Japanese fleet had profound implications for both sides and significantly influenced the course of the war. The US forces, Lee, achieved a decisive victory, albeit at a significant cost. The American task force lost 4 destroyers and saw the South Dakota heavily damaged with 26 hits, including a crippling 14-inch shell. Despite these losses, Admiral Lee's advanced radar technology and tactical acumen turned the tide in favor of the Americans. The Japanese fleet, led by the battleship Kirishima, suffered catastrophic losses, with Kirishima sinking after sustaining 20 direct hits from Washington's 16-inch guns. The Japanese also lost the cruiser Sendai and several destroyers in the chaotic retreat. The battle's casualties were significant on both sides. The US suffered approximately 242 deaths, including the loss of Rear Admirals Daniel J. Callahan and Norman Scott in the earlier stages of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Japanese losses were even more severe, with over 1,500 sailors perishing, including many aboard Kirishima and the other vessels that were sunk or heavily damaged. The destruction of these critical ships severely weakened the Japanese Navy's operational capacity in the Pacific. Strategically, the battle had far-reaching consequences. The successful defense of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal ensured that the airfield remained under Allied control, allowing the US to maintain its supply lines to Australia and continue launching offensives in the Pacific. The defeat forced the Japanese to reconsider their expansionist strategy, marking the beginning of a series of setbacks that would culminate in their eventual defeat in the Pacific. The legacy of Admiral Lee and the pivotal role of radar technology were cemented by this battle. Lee's insistence on utilizing radar and his ability to innovate naval tactics in the heat of battle demonstrated a forward-thinking approach that revolutionized naval warfare. His leadership secured a critical victory and underscored the importance of technological advancements in modern combat. Lee's name became synonymous with the effective use of radar, and his actions during the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal showcased the potential of this technology to turn the tide of battle.